Today is Wednesday, the 11th of August, and it's 10:18 here in Jerusalem. I'm going to bring you up to date on some of the research I've been coming across the past couple of days. I apologize for not being online, but as you know, I was doing 2 weeks of volunteer work with the Israeli Army, and so I was away in the Negev desert for a couple of weeks near the city of Beersheba. But anyway, I'm back here at Yad Vashem Daily doing my research, and let me share some of the findings with you I've come across yesterday and today so far. And it may take a couple of videos to get you up to snuff on this. In one book that I located, A Holocaust Crossroads, Jewish Women and Children in Ravensbrück, 2010 was written, a very current book. Ravensbrück was a women's camp. It was the last of the 6 major camps built before World War II to suppress opposition to the Nazi regime and to isolate those considered outcasts within the German society. It's the only camp that was built solely to house women. It was documented the slaughter of women through torture, hard labor, and a great deal of medical experimentation was done there. Jewish prisoners only totaled about 15% of the population. Most Jews were brought there between 1945, in the middle of 45, and the start of 1944 and the start of 1945. In September of 1942, Himmler, one of the top Nazis, ordered women in Ravensbrück transferred to Auschwitz. Some of the women were not sent with their children. Ravensbrück was a social crossroads of sorts. Women from different social strata, national, ethnic, religious origin, were all forced to live together under extreme, horrific conditions. The Nazis set up a hierarchy in the social order among the prisoners, and your place in the hierarchy, the strata of social order, was determined by racial and ethnic affiliation, followed by the national category that you fell into, political worldview, religion, and then finally your degree of social deviation. Closest to the center of the power were German political and criminal prisoners, who were used by the SS in the self-administration system of the camp as prisoner functionaries, as they were called. Jews were located, of course, at the bottom of the scale, following all the other Nazi ideology, as they were sentenced to total group annihilation eventually. As mass transports of Jews began, then Jewish prisoners were isolated under the worst possible conditions and evoked disgust because of their deteriorated condition. Upon arrival, they were forced to lay for 3 or 4 days in an open yard without blankets and a straw mattress, possibly in the open air with rain pouring down on them. Non-Jewish women were processed into the camp much more quickly. Being near the town of Fürstenberg, it was at the doorsteps of an ordinary German citizen in that town who saw what was happening. The history of the Jewish women and children of Ravensbrück was not really investigated until the 1990s. Because it was in Germany and most Jews were sent east to the camps, this and some others have been considered marginal to the Holocaust as far as camps were concerned. The perception was that they were exporting the killing to the east. Yet Ravensbrück's role was essential in the study of the Holocaust. It is essential. It was camps like this that the Third Reich first applied imprisonment as part of their racial policy. Later it was used as a model camp, and the commander of Ravensbrück was then sent to Auschwitz to set up the women's section of Auschwitz there. What remains today are rather recollections of Jewish women who arrived during the last months of the war and had been there for a short time. About 130,000 women, girls, and small children died in the camp. Now, in a book called Trapped, Essays on the Holocaust of the Czech Jews in 1939 to 1943 by Ruth Bondy, interesting information came out of that. She wrote an essay in that book that I focused in on. It was called A Holocaust of Female Gender, Women in the Terezin Ghetto. And what it basically told us was what distinguished between men and women in the Terezin Ghetto. Now remember, Terezin was a model camp. This was the camp that the Nazis set up to supposedly be to showing the world how wonderfully they were treating the Jews, and it was all a facade, fake, as most people who study the Holocaust well know, and those of you who will study it will learn in greater depth. Very few women normally worked outside the home during those days. Man always was the main breadwinner prior to the Shoah being the Holocaust. Germans occupied Terezin Ghetto, the ghetto at Terezin, in March of 1939, and 40% of the women arriving in the ghetto declared that they had a profession. This was a result of changes by the Germans, and women needed to prepare for a life of hard labor in the countries they were to immigrate to, for the changing conditions of their homeland. Another practical reason: no matter how poorly qualified you were, it was better to be registered in the ghetto as having a profession rather than having none. Before the Shoah, many women had domestic help in the home. Later, it was forbidden to even have an Aryan work in the home of a Jew. So more work subsequently fell on the women as men were taken to do forced labor. The men were out of the picture in many cases. People often move from their own spacious single-family homes to very tiny apartments with other families, sharing the home, the kitchen, the bathroom, and such. The trauma of taking leave of one's house, of one's loved objects, was severe for married women with families, and they never got over it, even in the ghetto. Women more than men tended to make their dwellings in the ghetto into a sort of substitute home, to build a nest for themselves, no matter how tiny the situation, the area was. Over the time that they spent there, the bunks in ghetto barracks were built in tiers of 3, and then the women would put their covers on the mattress, hang pictures of dear ones over the bunk, place little doilies on the board at its foot, and put their belongings on it, trying to keep everything clean as if it was a regular home. When then deported east, they again lost their home. During the 3.5 years of the ghetto's existence, not a single woman was elected to the Council of Elders in Terezin. Women served on no positions in the running of the ghetto services. I'm going to stop here and start the next video immediately because there's a 10-minute limit on YouTube.